This video brought to you by jadedpainting.com. If you need your miniatures painted to a tabletop standard, check out jadedpainting.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another painting tutorial. As always, my name is Jay and I'll be showing you how to paint this Chaos Warpsmith, one of the cool new awesome HQs for the Chaos Space Marine Codex. So I began with the model primed with plate mail metal from Army Painter. If you don't have plate mail metal, I'd recommend priming your model either gray or black and then base coating it with lead belcher. Since it is now all base coated, I then gave the entire model a shading with a non-oil. This non-oil will get in all the recesses of the metallic areas, which pretty much the entire model is basically metallic. So it'll get in the recesses and give some really nice shading and depth to all these metallic areas. And it'll also give a much more worn out appearance to all the metallic areas. And this is especially important with something like Warpsmith, since it would have been in a lot of battles and it's chaos, so you want to get that old grungier appearance. If you want to take it one step further and give it a more dirty appearance, I recommend a 1-to-1 mix of non-oil and Agrax Earthshade. I just wanted to keep it a little bit more clean, so I just went with non-oil. But I used a pretty heavy non-oil shade over the entire model. Usually, the shading is a quick step, but as you can see, this step took a little bit of time, seeing as I mentioned earlier, most of the model is metallic, because all the tentacles are metallic, the axe is metallic, most of the armor is going to be metallic, so there's just a lot of silver on the model, and that is why I saved some time and primed it with a metallic primer. If after a single shading you are unhappy with the depth of color, feel free to do another shading. Just make sure that the first shade is completely dry before proceeding to the second one. And when the shade was dry, I gave all of the silver areas a highlight with Iron Breaker, the first layer color associated with lead belcher. For all these metallic areas, I basically just use a dry brush and sometimes an overbrush technique, but pretty much just a dry brush over all the areas. But I must warn you that all the tentacles and the axe, seeing as this model is resin, are very fragile, so I recommend taking a lot of care when you dry brush over them. I personally recommend using your finger under the model to prop it up to keep it strong when you're dry brushing the tentacles. Otherwise, they do have a very easy way of snapping off. And this dry brush of Iron Breaker will pick up all the raised areas and leave the nice shading in the recesses, giving some really nice contrast over these metallic areas. I never ever paint metallics with just a single coat. I always give them a base coat, a shading, and at least one and usually two highlights. As you can see, I'm taking my time and going very carefully over the tentacles, and then sometimes I'm using my fingers to prop them up to keep them strong. Luckily, dry brushing does not take a lot of time, so this step was actually relatively quick compared to the base coat and shading. And finally, I gave one more very light dry brush with Rune Fang Steel. For this dry brush, I only focused on the higher areas of the model and what areas specifically were being hit by the light source. That is a great way to know which areas to highlight even further. Just look at what areas your light source is hitting and then focus on those specific parts of the model to dry brush. So as you can see, I'm focusing on the top of the axe, the top of the tentacles, and the top of the shoulder pads and chimneys, as well as his helmet. Just the areas that light would be hitting specifically. With the metallics done, I then base coated all the red areas on the model with Mephiston Red. For this particular step, I basically just focused on some of the wires, which I just chose most of the round wires that don't have any of the ripples, and all the tongues of the tentacles. Luckily, Mephiston Red goes over pretty much any color with relative ease. It is a great base color and goes over these silver areas very easily, and with just a single coat you get really, really nice coverage. But as always, if you don't get perfect coverage after one coat, feel free to do a second coat. Just let the first one dry before proceeding to the second one, and so forth. And when the base coat's done, I gave a shade to all these areas very quickly with Carroburg Crimson. It's a great red color, and if given in a very heavy fashion such as I'm doing here, it will get in the recesses and almost produce a black shading, but it'll be a very, very dark red. It looks very nice and gives some great contrast to all these red areas. And with this step nearing completion, we can turn our attention to highlighting these red areas and then focusing on the blacks and golds of the model.